Gulliver of Mars. This episode's book is Gulliver of Mars. It was published in 1964 by Ace, and it has this fantastic Frank Frazetta cover. There's Gulliver, giant rat, dragon, bird, dinosaur, tree, monster. Makes you want to open it, doesn't it? Makes you want to read this book, doesn't it? Huh? Pretty tempting. I've actually had this book in my collection for, I'm guessing more than 30 years. I bought it at Renaissance Books in Milwaukee, which was like a book collector's paradise. It was 5 stories of just old books. It was so musty in there. I felt like building 3 tents. It used to be part of you can see there are still some ephemera and stamps from the Milwaukee Public Library, which used to own the book, but now it's mine. And it has moved with me across cities and even continents, and I've never read it. And even though it's been in my possession for probably 30-some years, I never really cracked it open, and I thought it was finally time. The book was originally published in 1905 as Lieutenant Gulliver Jones, His Vacation, by Edwin L. Arnold. And in that Gulliver, it is spelled with an A-R. They changed it to E-R for this Ace reprint. So maybe to match the Gulliver spelling from the Jonathan Swift novel? Maybe. This is an early planetary romance. Some people consider it the first planetary romance. I think Gustavus Pope's Journey to Mars and Journey to Venus precedes it by a few years. So it ain't, but it's got the seeds of what planetary romance or Sword and Planet would become. It features Gulliver Jones. He's a Civil War vet. He's an American. Arnold is actually a British author, so he's a British guy writing about American hero. Gulliver has a bunch of unpaid bills. He did not get the promotion that he wanted, and he's worried that he will not be able to ask for his sweetheart's hand in marriage because the dad will say there's no way that you will be able to support her. So no. So he's rather depressed and bumbling around the docks, and out of nowhere, a man on a flying carpet just appears and dies. And Gulliver has the man taken to the hospital, and the man dies, is pronounced, yes, he truly is dead there. And the hospital says, hey, you want to keep the carpet? And Gulliver's like, okay. And he looks at the carpet. It looks like there's kind of astronomical symbology on it and diagrams. And he's standing on the carpet and bemoaning his life and says, man, I wish I was anywhere but here. I wish I even was like on Mars. And suddenly the carpet rolls up and he's trapped inside and he feels the carpet moving by itself. And the next thing he knows, it unfolds and he is on another planet entirely. And he eventually finds out that this planet is Mars. This Mars is forested and has many seas, and he discovers immediately a group of people who are part of this civilization called the Hither. They look like us, kind of. Their skin is described as being rather ivory in color. They wear togas and these diaphanous robes, and live a life of absolute leisure. They don't do anything. They just kind of lounge around in these ancient crumbling cities that were built generations before, and no one has any desire to fix them up, to repair them, to build anything else. Really, all they do is just lounge and eat and sleep. They have slaves that attend to them and give them the food and that sort of thing. There also is no real sense of ownership of anything. If you want to take a ride down the river, you just get in the nearest boat and ride that boat. And if the person who owns that boat, wants it, they're just going to have to go pick it up where you left it off. That's just how it is in this world. The slaves are androgynous. Gulliver has trouble figuring out who's a dude and who's a dudette. And it troubles him that these folks are this way. Eventually he meets the princess of the Hither people and falls madly in love with her, completely forgets his fiancée back on Earth, and actually even connives that the two should get married during this mass wedding. The Hither people do not court. They just are assigned brides and grooms, and then there's this gigantic wedding of all the single people on the same day, and that's just how their society works. The wedding is never completed because from out of the hills come the Thither people, who are kind of described like big, hairy Neanderthal types. Sloping forehead and hulking ape-like brutes. And they steal the princess because actually what's going on is the Thither people demand tribute from the Hither people, including the prettiest girl in town, to be the next plaything of the king of the Thithers. And Gulliver Jones decides that he is going to rescue this princess. None of the other Hither people are interested. They're just like, whatever, because they lead this life of leisure. They have absolutely no compunction to do anything aside from lounge. So he goes off and has different adventures, encounters strange things in the jungle. He ends up hanging out with a lot of Thither people, and they're actually really super polite and nice and helpful. And they're not at all the savage brutes that the Hither people believe them to be. But Jones still is compelled that he is going to... it's not right to kidnap a girl. And he's going to bring her back to her people, even if the Thither people are pretty nice. The cover features this scene with the giant rat and the dragon monster and Gulliver stalking away, and I thought I'd read that scene to you to give you kind of a taste of how the prose is. Arnold has a pretty, almost purplish prose, but it doesn't go over the top. It's just very, I like his style. How I feel about the story is another matter, and I'll get to that later on. So I thought I could read the scene where this happens. At last I began to wonder whether those earth-shaking beasts had not been an evil dream, and was just venturing to stretch out a cramped leg and rally myself upon my cowardice, when without warning at my elbow rose the most ear-piercing scream of rage that ever came from a living throat. There was a sweeping rush in the darkness, which I could feel but not see, and with a shock the two gladiators met in the midst of the arena. Over and over they went screaming and struggling and slipping and plunging. I could hear them tearing at each other, and the sharp cries of pain the first one and then another gave as claw or tooth got home. And all the time, though the ground was quaking under their struggles and the air full of horrible uproar, not a thing was to be seen. I did not even know what manner of beasts they were, who rocked and rolled and tore at each other's throats. But I heard their teeth snapping and their fierce breath in the pauses of the struggle, and could but wait in a huddle amongst the roots until it was over. To and fro they went, now at the far side of the dark clearing, now so close that the hot drops of blood from their jaws fell on my face like rain in the darkness. It seemed as though the fight would never end, but presently there was more of worrying in it and less of snapping. It was clear one or the other had had enough, and as I marked this, those black shadows came gasping and struggling towards me. There was a sudden sharp cry, a desperate final tussle, before which strong trees snapped and bushes were flattened out like grass, not 20 yards away. And then, for a minute, all was silent. You want to know who gets it? Spoiler alert. It's the rat. The rat dies. We never find out what the winning creature looked like. That dragon is entirely Frank Frazetta's design. So this book, I think, is more famous for its history than for what it actually is. There was a time it caused quite an uproar in the world of fandom, and it has met a number of different sort of reincarnations. So I wanted to delve into sort of where this book has gone and what it's done. So Arnold, as previously stated, published this book in 1905 under the title Lieutenant Gulliver Jones, His Vacation, and this was his last book. Arnold had tried his hand at writing fiction and nonfiction for about 15 years and never really found much success with it. When Gulliver did not make much money, he quit writing. What he did for the last 30 years of his life, I have no idea. Because the book kind of died on the vine, it was not much discussed or ever reprinted. It was just another one of those curious, fantastic early sci-fi books that leaned closer to fantasy than hard SF. Then, in the early 60s, Canaveral publisher Richard A. Lupoff was talking books with an old sci-fi book collector. The man was trying to sell off some of his tomes, and he put Lieutenant Gulliver Jones, His Vacation, in Lupoff's hands and said it was Burroughs-like. Canaveral had at the time a deal with Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated to publish the yet unpublished Burroughs books, so a better selling point couldn't have been made to Lupoff. But for whatever reason, Canaveral didn't reprint Lieutenant Gulliver Jones. The book instead was reprinted by Ace and renamed Gulliver of Mars. Lupoff, however, wrote an introduction to the book, which proved to be somewhat inflammatory. In the introduction, Lupoff suggests that Edgar Rice Burroughs got his ideas for his Mars books from Arnold's Lieutenant Gulliver Jones. Ruined cities, warring tribes, a princess, a river of death. All those ideas must have come from Arnold's book, not Burroughs' own mind. And Lupoff then went on to claim that Forever Young John Carter was stolen from another of Arnold's books, Fra the Phoenician. So this naturally upset a number of Burroughs readers and scholars. No doubt the introduction was more there to incite sales among the curious than tear down Burroughs' creative name. But was Lupoff right? I'll give my opinion on the matter in a bit. Ace's reprint, though, put Jones back into the sword and planet zeitgeist. It was a book ripe for the pickin', especially because it was now in the public domain. So about a decade after Ace's reprint, Marvel brought Gulliver Jones to the comics. Marvel tried to update the character a bit. In their comics, Jones is a Namvet who is teleported to an ancient Mars, not the dried-out husk of a world science knew by then. The costumes of the characters in the comic don't really match those described in the book. The Martians have brightly colored skins, and the tone of the comic doesn't resemble that of the book. But man, dig that Jim Steranko cover. Almost 30 years later, Alan Moore had Gulliver Jones meet John Carter in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic book. The two lead a final effort to push the octopus-like War of the Worlds Martians off of Mars and inadvertently sending them to invade Earth. Oops. As with all of Moore's spins on these public domain characters, he takes just about as many liberties with Gulliver as Marvel did 3 decades before. In 2012, the comic book world had Gulliver and John Carter meet again, this time for Dynamite Entertainment's Warriors of Mars. In this crossover, it's revealed that Gulliver's princess Heru is actually Dejah Thoris's mom. And in 2025, Dynamite revisited the character for their anthology, Savage Tales. As for books, in 2023, Heartbeat Publication published the novel Gulliver Jones and the Treasure of the Tsar, where Jones and some British spies race to find the Fountain of Youth before the Nazis do. I haven't read it, so I don't know what kind of character this Jones is, but I hope he's a little more active than the one in the original book. So what did I think of Gulliver and his Mars and all of that? This is not a very adventurous book at all, and vacation is probably a good way to describe it, because Gulliver spends, I would say, a good half of the book either eating or sleeping. He's always looking for the next food. Every morning dawns and he is asking whoever is close to him where breakfast is. And he's also drinks a lot, gets drunk, and falls asleep, and doesn't wake up till, late the following day. Even when he's out to rescue his princess Heru, he just keeps wasting time eating and sleeping. It is clear that rescuing this woman is not a real high priority. He is not John Carter going to save Dejah Thoris from Tharks and evil Jedaks. This is just some dude who is like, aren't any of you going to try and rescue her? Well, all right, I'll go. He's also relatively cowardly. He smacks a few people around, but he doesn't fight monsters. And he'd really rather just chat and eat and drink. Gulliver spends so little time adventuring that I actually wonder if this book is truly supposed to be a satire. Arnold is a British guy, and this lazy soldier is an American, so it's entirely possible that Arnold's having a nice poke at his American brothers, that this soldier's just kind of a bum. The idea of the hither and the thither people, this sort of sublimely lazy civilization, and then this hardworking civilization. I don't know if that's a commentary on the civilizations of the world he was in, not long before he wrote this book. H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine, and you have the Eloi and the Morlocks. The Eloi being these almost childlike cattle that the Morlocks are secretly raising and feeding on. And you get a little bit of that, the thither folk, the Neanderthal-like folks kind of say, the only reason, we demand tribute of the hither people is they're so lazy and it's so easy. If they just fought back, we wouldn't bother, but we can just, take over And there are no repercussions at all. So is it a commentary on sort of the aristocracy of England and the working class of England? I don't know. Maybe. I'm inclined to think so, but it's the problem with looking at this as a satire is it's so poorly done as a satire that you aren't exactly sure what he's satirizing. And at the same time, it's such a poor, weak adventure that you can't imagine that the book is supposed to thrill you. It kind of fails on both fronts. And do I think that Burroughs was inspired by Gulliver? No, I don't. For one, Lieutenant Gulliver Jones' His Vacation was never printed in the United States. It stayed in England and never had an American version. Burroughs was also relatively poor when the book came out, and so buying imported books was probably not high on his list of priorities. And I think that, you know, it's, yes, they happen on Mars. Yes, there is a princess. Yes, there is a river of death. Yes, there are the crumbling ruins of a former civilization. But you can also find those kinds of things in lots of other books from the era. You can find rivers of death. Just think of the river Styx. You know, this idea of crossing a river or going down a river to get to the world beyond. That's an old idea. So I don't think that Burroughs stole Gulliver of Mars like Richard Lupoff sort of claimed. If you are interested in old SF, this book might be of interest to you. It's not going to thrill, and I'm not even sure it's going to amuse. I did like the style of his writing, but I can't recommend it for the adventure, and I can't recommend it for the satire. What it most reminded me of was this novel I read several years ago, which was also a sort of an early fantasy. What is it called? A Message in a Copper Cylinder. These people find this copper cylinder and there's a message in there, and it talks about this adventure that happens, I think it's near the North Pole, and they find, you know, one of the lost tribes of Israel and who live in this backwards society, and there are dinosaurs in the forest, and it also seems like it's supposed to be a satire, but it's just this short of being a successful satire, but this short of being a successful adventure. So, you read Gulliver of Mars? You read Fra the Phoenician? Familiar with any of other works by Edwin L. Arnold? Have you owned thoughts on the origins of Burroughs' Barsoom? Leave your comment down below, and love to read them. And I'll see you next time.